Purim remembers the events of the book of Esther, of how Esther saved her people from annihilation. It's a time for partying, wearing costumes, lively readings, and reenactments of the story. Purim in New York City was always fun to watch. Jews of all ages in costumes in the streets, on their way to parties and celebrations. It looked like so much fun. So let me tell you the story of Esther. By the way, there will be audience participation. I will let you know when and how you can participate. So the king of Persia, Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes I, was throwing a banquet for his officials and ministers. It was a 7-day banquet. His queen Vashti was also holding a banquet for the women of the royal court. Now there was a lot of drinking that was going on at the king's banquet. This is what it says in the book of Esther. Drinks were served in golden goblets, goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Drinking was by flagons, without restraint, for the king had given orders to the officials of his palace to do as each one desired. On the 7th day of the banquet, Scripture says the king was merry with wine. Yeah, imagine how merry the king was after a 7-day binge. So he wants to show off his beautiful queen Vashti to the partygoers. He summons her and she refuses. The Bible doesn't say why she refused, but maybe she refused to be displayed in such a manner. Maybe she refused to be humiliated in front of a bunch of drunken men. So the king and his legal advisors thought, if Queen Vashti gets away with refusing a command of her husband and king, it may incite all the women throughout the kingdom to revolt against their husbands. So they had Queen Vashti banished from the kingdom. Now later, the king regrets his decision. I'm sure the next morning, in his headache. So a kingdom-wide search begins to look for a new queen. So enter Esther and her guardian Mordecai into the picture. And the king is taken in by her beauty, makes her the new queen, and she moves into the harem. Mordecai, her guardian, learns of a plot to kill the king, so he tells Esther, who in turn tells the king, saving him. Now, it's important to know Esther's and Mordecai's ethnicity is being kept a secret. They're Jews, and Jews are not looked upon with favor, and it was best to keep their identity a secret. A man named Haman enters into the picture. And in the traditional Purim readings or reenactments of this, whenever you hear the name Haman, you boo or you do this. So, let's practice. Haman. One more time. Haman. So, a man named Haman enters into the picture. He is made vizier, chief administrator, high-ranking official, and the king commands all people are to bow to Haman. Boo! Haman, boo, is an Amalekite, ancient enemies of the Jews. Mordecai, being Jewish, refuses to bow before Haman. Boo! Haman, boo, is furious. And he finds out Mordecai is a Jew. And because Haman, boo, is so angry and he is so vile, Haman, boo, vows and plots to kill not just Mordecai, but all of the Jews in the kingdom. He says, if I'm going to hate one Jew, I'm going to hate them all. And Mordecai learns of this plot, and he tells Esther. Esther tells Mordecai to gather all the Jews in the city. They are to fast. And she said she's going to go directly to the king to plead for her people. This is dangerous because she is going before the king without a formal summons. If you go before the king without a formal summons, you break the law and you risk your life. She shows up, and the king sees her beauty and forgets that she's breaking the law. And Esther invites the king and Haman, boo, to dinner for 2 nights in a row. So let me read from the book of Esther, starting at the 7th chapter, to hear what happens next. So the king and Haman, boo, went to dinner with Queen Esther. At this second dinner, while they were drinking wine, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what would you like? Half my kingdom? Just ask and it's yours. Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, give me my life and give my people their lives. We've been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, sold to be massacred, eliminated. If we have been just sold off to slavery, I wouldn't have even brought this up. Our troubles wouldn't have been worth bothering the king over. King Xerxes exploded. Who? Where is he? This person is monstrous. Esther says, an enemy, an adversary, the evil, you ready? Haman. Boo! Haman, boo! Was terror-stricken before the king and queen. The king, raging, left his wine, stalked out into the palace garden. And Haman, boo! Stood there pleading with Queen Esther for his life. He could see that the king was finished with him and that he was doomed. As the king came back from the palace garden into the banquet hall, Haman, boo! Was groveling on the couch on which Esther had reclined. And the king roared out, will he even molest the queen while I'm just around the corner? And when that word left the king's mouth, all the blood drained from Haman's face. Boo! Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, spoke up. Look over there. There's a gallows that we had built for Mordecai, who saved the king's life. It's right next to Haman's house, and it's 75 feet tall. And the king said, hang him on it. So he was hanged on the very gallows that he had built for Mordecai, and the king's hot anger cooled. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, boo, the archenemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king because Esther had explained their relationship. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, boo, and gave it to Mordecai. Esther appointed Mordecai over Haman's, boo, over his estate. And the order of the massacre was canceled, and all is well. Now, there's two really interesting things about Esther in the Bible. If you read Esther, God is never mentioned. It doesn't seem that God was taking an active role in Esther's actions or saving God's people. There's no prayers. There's no mention of God's laws. The only ritual that takes place is Esther calling on the Jews of the city to fast before she sees the king unsummoned. Another interesting thing is that Esther is a Jew, married to a non-Jew, living in a harem, eating with non-Jews. Does she follow Jewish dietary laws? Does she pray? We don't know. You could say the book of Esther is a secular story nestled in sacred scripture. It's an early Jewish novella. It's a tale of the royal court. It's meant to be read aloud. Second thing is that Jews and Christians debated for centuries whether or not to even include the book of Esther in the Bible. The book of Esther was not formally and universally accepted into the canon until the 3rd century for Jews, the 4th century for the Western Church, and not until the 8th century for the Eastern Church. So why Esther? And why Esther today? I'm going to share my 2 takeaways with the story of Esther. First, God is actually there in the story of Esther. Where? How? God doesn't send angels like God did to Abraham. God doesn't appear in clouds like God did to Moses. God doesn't walk around with Esther and Mordecai like God did in the garden with Adam and Eve. So where is God? God is silent and hidden behind the scenes. If you read the story of Moses in Exodus, in the very beginning, God is barely mentioned or plays an active role until Moses' encounter with the burning bush. God doesn't play an active or direct role in saving baby Moses by putting him in a basket down the Nile River. It's women, Moses' mother and sister, Pharaoh's daughter and her maid, who save Moses. But it doesn't mean that God didn't play a part. In stories like Moses and Esther, women are in the forefront. God works through the unexpected. God uses the unlikely to do amazing things. Too many impossible coincidences occur in these stories which foil the efforts of evil, destruction, oppression, and genocide. God guides us through history without us even knowing it. And my second takeaway is how God sneakily gives power to the powerless. Now you may say, Esther was a queen. She was living in luxury. She could have anything she wanted. How could she be powerless? Remember, she was living in a harem. Basically, she was there for the king's pleasure whenever he wanted it, probably amongst the vast number of women in the harem. She couldn't just approach the king whenever she wanted. She must be invited by him. If anyone appears before the king without an invitation, they risk execution. And finally, she was not a native-born Persian. She was a Jew. She was an immigrant, if you will. Her homeland was conquered by the mighty Persian army. Her people were forced out of their homes to live in a new country. So tell me, how was she able to do what she did with all of this stacked against her? Who nudged her to spring into action? Who gave her the courage to appear before the king uninvited? No more passive harem girl for Esther. No more standing on the sidelines letting someone else deal with it. No more silence. No more praying and sitting on their hands waiting for God to do supernatural things. So tell me then, how was Esther able to do all these things? God works in unexpected ways through unexpected people. God works through each of us in hidden ways. Sometimes it's a little nudge. Sometimes it's that buzzing in your ear like that really irritating mosquito. Sometimes it's just a big old kick and a push. So may we hear God's hidden and seemingly silent voice in our lives. May God give each one of us the courage to find our strength like Queen Esther. And may we manage all the odds against us to bring about God's love, peace, and justice. Next week, we look at Mary Magdalene, the first person to preach the news that Christ is alive and has risen. Please rise if you're able.